St Maud. We're showing The Feast this afternoon, and we've got Roger Cullen, who wrote that, which is, honestly, you're in for a treat. Filmed like a dark song filmed in the thing, and we had Evan Hayes today, and he had a Dark Signal, which was actually filmed on the arm. So can you fill in any gaps, because I've done a deep dive?
Well, I mean, I think you're right to say, hello everyone, by the way.
This is
I
Neil
think
again.
I'm Neil. You're right to say that there is, I think, a bit of a moment, I think the past, not few years, set when we discount the lost years recently, but I do think there's a bit of a moment happening with horror in Wales, and I think there's maybe a combination of things. I think the way that a lot of films, or a lot of prominent films, potentially get funded in Wales, there's an awareness that genre works, that genre is popular, that people want to watch genre films, and I think for me the reason I like horror is because it's such a broad.
Yeah, well, I'd argue that a lot of films could be horror adjacent. And horror is just like comedy. You can slot it in to so many different genres, and it will work.
Absolutely, and you can do so much with that then in terms of the story you're telling, the characters you're exploring, the themes, whatever you want to do. And I think, for me, what I have noticed maybe more recently is, and I mean, I am very much thinking of Gwynedd or The Feast as a prime example of this, is you see a lot of horror made in Wales and produced in Wales and brilliant stuff, is that horror that is also telling Welsh-specific or Wales-specific
the
stories.
folklore of Wales. I mean, it's like Chad, who done Mary Flint just today, or Spielberg, as we're calling him now. I can't think of that many horror films that have told the stories from Wales.
Yeah,
and already the follow-up to my... What's it called? The follow-up? Or the Alligator Ottoman? The follow-up to Mary Flint, the Alligator Ottoman.
Oh, the Afang.
Afang, yeah, which is... Yeah,
it's half crocodile, half beaver, so I wanted to keep someone, because it's just ridiculous, right?
But it can be potentially terrifying.
There's huge potential for...
Yeah.
I mean, if you just have to think of the Mabinogi, right,
Yeah.
and you've got a Pair Dadeni in a Mabinogi, which is literally a zombie cauldron.
Yeah.
And that was, how many hundreds of years ago were we coming up with that nonsense?
Well, thousands.
It's just like, it's right there and it's right for the picking. And I think right now, especially given how well The Feast did as well, and how not unashamed, it's maybe not quite the right word, but having spoken to Roger and Lee, the director, previously, because we had them as guests at Abattoirs, that they are like, yeah, this is a horror film, we love horror films, this is what's informed it, rather than being coy about it, I think is really exciting, and there's so much potential there, and I think, yeah, for me, it's kind of, it's events like this, it's fans like you coming and showing the demand that I hope will sort of push that over into the kind of the deluge then of Welsh horror.
Well, with the rise of so-called elevated horror, just taking a film like Midsommar, who would have thought a film about a very strange North Swedish cult would be so popular? And again, it was touching on like a local thing, and there is so much in Wales of that dating back thousands of years that has never really, aside from some nightmare-fueled 70s children's programmes which has touched on it, they haven't really been, told in proper ways.
I think, personally, by the way, I just feel the need to put out that I absolutely hate the idea of elevated horror and post-horror.
Yeah. It's a bit snobby.
It winds me up. I absolutely acknowledge that as a marketing tactic, it exists, it is a thing, but as a enjoyer of horror films, it winds me up when you get these things that are like, wow, look at this horror film that has something to say. And I'm like, horror films have always had something to say. You just have to pay attention to them a bit more closely.
Well,
do you know what I mean?
It was funny just watching Geronimo for the first time. I've had anxiety issues, and I was watching it and I'm like, yeah, I can really relate to that. And it's important that, and I always think horror should make you reflect on yourself, you know. And another thing about The Feast, which obviously people will watch later, is you can relate so much to the characters in it, you know, good and bad, and it makes you look at yourself horribly, you know. And sometimes people don't want to do that.
And they're very, when you see it, not to talk about it too much, they're very Welsh
Yeah.
characters, without it being stereotypes.
Yeah,
they're very
caricatures.
Yeah, and I think, but they're universal at the same time. I think that's it's if you've not already seen it, you're in for such a treat. It's a brilliant film.
Yes. So stick around and we'll lock the doors if you just have like try to leave.
I've been handed the baton. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm flanked by two short filmmakers. One of the older, my generation, and one of the younger generation, who both...
Put that on.
Botox will be having how easy or hard was it for you to get your projects off the ground?
So it started off as a college project, and then it kind of just disappeared from that because it wasn't anymore. So there's an Armadillo in Your Dreams. We started in November, and then we finished it literally like a week ago. And is this working? Yes, it is. Okay. It's working.
Yes.
Sorry, it's just my inner workings. My mental illness is supposed to be gone.
Is it going to be put online for people to watch?
Yes.
Have you got a YouTube or thing?
So we have this production group that we want a business one day called Lake Productions, and we've got one of my crew members down there, John, and we want a one day business and freelance filmmaking. So we released on that channel in the foreseeable future. Once I kind of get the word from everyone that everyone's happy for it to be released, really, because the film Scream isn't necessarily the one we want to release.
If it's still work in progress.
No, well, it's done.
John's business with it, so you can do it.
So if anyone has like feedback if something's too loud, if something's too quiet, you can tell us, and we can tweak.
Because the version I saw wasn't the complete version. It was watching it. Wait a minute, that's weird.
It doesn't have an ending.
Well, I saw an even more incomplete version when Chad sent it to me that we're putting this on. And as I was looking through these, and I thought, I haven't seen this bit. And Chad went, we only got sent this a couple of days ago. So if you said it's a work in progress, which is, it's only fair.
You get a full film.
Yeah.
I nearly died while making it, so...
Oh, that's a fun story, please tell.
It is a fun story. And look at Ryan down there, one of our... he's very talented. He says he can't act, but he definitely he nailed it. He nearly set me on fire.
That's one for the blooper reel.
Wasn't on camera, it's just
after running around with his legs on fire.
He rolling on the ground. Can't help it. Your mum told me to. Gotta do everything your mum says.
So you've worked through a group called Tape in Colwyn Bay, haven't you?
Yes.
Very similar to Wicked Whale. We're not going to say they're as good, but they're a right company.
Yeah, so
thank you.
they're a brilliant film charity based in Old Colwyn, and they support us, and they're not directly tied in with the production of the film. They've been very supportive. In fact, they got us the gig here with the film screening here because Chad and Andrew, great people, they came to Tape.
And I did.
And
thanks.
sorry, I forgot about you. You got the two main characters, you got the side character. Wow. That's all right.
Wow. Neil, no. Do it on the panel now.
But no, they came and they explained Rilla and
the hard sell. I actually remember you telling Chad who was Armadillo, blah blah Armadillo. Armadillo.
Yeah. So well, thank you anyways, because the film screen gets it a bit of exposure, and it'll be subject to other film festivals as well. So
well, it gets your product out there, and it gets your talent out there, which is the whole point of these things.
Yes, but no. I hope people do like the film though, because
it's there.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows what you've done with little.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is again the point of things like Wicked Whales and Tape. Is to give people the chance young people especially, because you never know where the next talent's coming from, and to give people a chance to work through, you know, and find out what parts of the industry you enjoy working in.
Oh yeah, of course.
You know, I heard strangely, you know, I like boom operating. It's like I never thought I would ever hear that. And when we were filming Married First Talks at the boom operating, I was like, do you work out to hold the boom? No, it's all in technique.
Yeah.
So, there's something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's a long process.
Yeah.
There's so many parts in the process, but there's so many areas people can enjoy and really like thrive in.
Yeah.
Horror for most of us, so good genre, good.
Well, it's, I mean, one advantage of horror though has always been people who've seen it as a low-cost, high-reward genre, and the amount of successful filmmakers that have started out in horror, and ironically, it's arguably one of the hardest ones to get right, though. You know, so.
Yeah, very true, very true. But younger generation of filmmakers, so you know. So I've actually met you before.
I'm Geraint, yes. So I wrote and directed Geronimo. I've always been drawn to horror, or certainly was as a teenager. And I love short stories. It's my favourite form of literature, probably because my attention span ain't great. But it's a high-protein form of storytelling, I think. And I don't think it's a terribly easy form. The fact that it's short doesn't make it easier at all. Exactly. In fact, I think it's in some ways it's more difficult, and it's certainly very difficult to make a short film once you've got money. It's in many ways it's actually easier when you're taking the guerrilla route. I made 3 short films before Geronimo, 2 of them with no money at all, just goodwill and enthusiasm.
That sums up the weekend for a lot of it.
Yes, exactly. And I think that, you know, when you've got goodwill and enthusiasm and a group of people who are doing it for the love of it, and then they're not expecting to be paid, they're not expecting lunch, they're just there because they give a shit, you know. And those are actually, I think, the most satisfying experiences, whereas this is not to say I didn't enjoy making Geronimo, but it nearly killed me.
You were saying,
frankly. Yeah, I mean, we were dealing with COVID at the time. I was filming something in the week leading up to the shooting dates, 3 night shoots in North Wales, and I was back and forth dealing with losing half my crew, a very small crew, to COVID tests. And when you lose your gaffer on the day before you start shooting, and money has gone out, money you paid, half your budget's gone already, and you've got no gaffer. You can't go ahead without a gaffer when you're using public money. You have to have one. It's a health and safety issue. So there's me thinking, well, if we don't have a gaffer, how can we still shoot it? Should we shoot it with, LED battery-driven lights from the floor? We'll at least have a product. Or do we find somebody? And thankfully we did find somebody. And it was very last minute, but it was very, very, very stressful business, and I'll never forget it.
Well, ironically, that showed up the MacGyvering last minute that you can actually do with a smaller film as well, is the fact that you have to adapt on the fly. I mean, just from helping Chaplin Mary Flynn, the amount of gaffer tape that came out for that day, realising we've got to do this, we've got to do that. It's
I mean, making a short, as I say, is stressful, and if you're doing it with very little money and you're doing it on the fly, that is really a massive learning curve. But it's always a learning curve. If you're not on a learning curve, you're not, you shouldn't be doing it.
You're always dissatisfied with the end product.
Absolutely. You look back and think, why did I do this, that, or the other? And you always should think that. I think it really is very important. You're never happy with the product. The day you are, then that's the day you should stop.
So, we touched on things like Wicked Wales and Tape. And what were the other? You obviously used other ones. What access to facilities did you have? Funding and the like.
Well, we went for Beacons funding, which we were lucky to get. That's it's not a massive amount of money. It's £16,000, but it's an awful lot more than zero. But the problems actually begin when you have money. You know, that's what I'm alluding to really, is the fact that once you've got money, you've got to do things officially, you've got to do things properly, you've got to pay for insurance, you've got to pay for this, that and the other, and you've got to pay for enhanced access materials. You know, nowadays, well, that's all well and good, but it takes up a lot of your budget.
It all becomes proper.
Yeah, and, you know, it really isn't actually enough to make Geronimo. That film there is a film that has a budget really closer to £50,000 because we had a great deal of goodwill from people like Gellert, post-production in Cardiff, who were, you know, I had one of the chaps there working 12 hours a day to move a bruise on Linda's face. Now, you don't really get the benefit of that today because we don't have blackouts here, but you know, that was goodwill. That was somebody willing to do the work for us in a really good post-production house. And ditto the soundscape and the sound design. You're talking thousands of pounds worth of work there. You don't get that for nothing.
No.
But we did.
Still staying on Geronimo, because this is half dedicated to this panel as well, sort of, is that Dylan's got a question here about Geronimo.
My question is, how did you get Patterson Joseph to play in the film?
I drugged him. I met Patterson when my fiancée, Rebecca, fiancée now, worked with Patterson on a production of Christmas Carol at the Old Vic a few years ago. And I went to see the production a couple of times and got talking to Patterson. He was a lovely, generous man, and we kind of stayed in touch. We occasionally saw each other, and I sent him the script and sort of bullied him into it, really. He read it and said, yeah, I'm in, which was a great thing because, of course, you know, having Patterson's name attached to the film really, I hope, helps. And, you know, when he turned up to film, half the crew went, my God, you got Johnson, is that Johnson?
Myself and a few other people in the know, did he ever get his coat back from Netherlands?
I don't know what you're talking about, you see, because I don't know. I'm not a show aficionado. I was just lucky to.
He lost his coat in Netherlands.
Okay. Well, I shall have to do some more homework.
Neil Gaiman reference as well. He's big at the moment, you know. And he's got a question.
Tell us about the real Geronimo.
The real Geronimo. Well, of course, Geronimo might be known to the people of Rhyl. Funny enough, one of the arcades on the front has the name Geronimo on the front, doesn't it?
But we noticed that. We were wondering if it was a link or...
I think it's coincidental, although they may have taken inspiration from the real Geronimo themselves. Now, this tale was inspired by Peter and Linda's stories. Now, Peter and Linda have enough stories about life in an arcade in Rhyl for an anthology of short horror films.
Well, there you go. There's an actual portmanteau. Think about it.
Well, yes. Geronimo was a character who visited the bistro and the arcade, I think I'm right in saying, and who played. She was a bad lady, you know. She had, I think, a few hygiene problems, it's fair to say. But she was a daily visitor at the arcade and played on the penny falls. And every time she won, she cried out, Geronimo. And I just thought that was a seed of an idea, really, and I went about writing a short inspired by that little kind of, you know...
It's kind of like the mundane things in life.
Yeah.
That, I mean, they're everywhere. I mean, it's often the stories that people don't tell about small towns, that if you dig far enough, you can find something sinister.
Yes, of course. Yeah, well, I mean, it depends which way you want to take it, really. It could have been a very different story, I guess. But as I say, Peter and Linda's stories about life in the arcade are quite hair-raising, frankly.
So you got, like you said, your portmanteau.
Yeah. Well, does that answer your question? I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing more exciting than that, really.
It definitely did.
Good.
So the talent coming out of Wales as well. The two names that immediately spring to mind are Martha Clark and Anne Elway, who you're going to see in the feast this afternoon, again pushing it, hope you're not disappointed, and both phenomenal actresses. I feel kind of bad that Anne Elway hasn't been mentioned as much as Martha Clark, you know, where easily the performances in both films, even though they're different roles, they're very comparable, you know, because they both carry the films.
Yeah, and she's been in a few horror films, like she was in The Toll as well, and she was in The Passing as well, which was a few years ago, which was probably the last Welsh language horror film before Blair. Although they were much more coy about calling it a horror film. But it was. But yeah, I think they're both great, and I think what's interesting is with Modfydd Clark is that she's really like, her star is absolutely flying at the moment after sort of Rings of Power and some of the other things she's done, and I think it'll be interesting to see who else sort of emerges from that. But I think, like, for me, the sort of as a horror icon, I guess, that I'm excited about in terms of seeing like what comes next from them is Prano Bailey Bond, because she's making film and is a horror fan, and you know isn't doing that very valid thing of making a horror film as your sort of starting point and then moving on to other things. Not to say that she needs to pigeonhole herself into horror either, but I think it'll be really interesting to see what we get next from her.
Prano Bailey Bond made Censor, which, if you haven't watched, is really worth seeing. Me and Chad were lucky to be the time we showed it, and Pamela and Abattoir, and it is, especially people who remember the 80s and the video nasty scare, it's a very, very well-made film.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I think that, for me, having something... I don't know, I could read about Censor all day. I think it's a brilliant film. It's
a thing which is, again, happening, and again, the horrible term, elevated horror, but you're getting, especially certain actresses coming through, and two that spring to mind are Gemma Ortega and Mia Goth, who are very open, and especially Mia Goth, about wanting to work within the genre and not afraid of looking grotesque, for want of a better term, and exploring the dark avenues of people's souls, and that's again what I took from the feast, you know.
I think that's it, and I think, like you say, you know, we preaching to the converted to say that horror, like I said, can do so many interesting things with it, and I think that's why it's exciting to think of telling Welsh stories or Welsh histories or Welsh myths, whichever it is, through that lens is really exciting, and I think what it also allows is it puts those stories perhaps more easily on a global stage as well, which I think we've seen with The Feast, is that it is fairly universally accessible in terms of the types of characters that are in it and whatnot, but you've got you've got the sort of matriarch of the family, which, you know, you don't have to be Welsh to sort of understand that sort of slight archetype that's there, but there's something particularly Welsh about the way that role is written, about the way it's played, about the sort of specifics of that character, again, without saying too much. And likewise with other characters, and I think there's something satisfying as a Welsh fan of horror to sit there and go, oh my gosh, this is my experience, or part of my experience on screen in a genre I love, and done really well as well. But I think, it's that sort of real excitement at the moment of going, you have to keep this going, which obviously there is talent and there is desire to do that. So, yeah.
I mean, to turn into Aaron, it's hard to believe that we're not the same age. But
what do you think?
Obviously the younger generation, I mean, me and Garrett come from the 80s, horror scenes and things like that, and the video nasties, the rise of the video industry, and you're coming from a different direction now. I mean, you're coming from the age of streaming. And your experiences and why and what attracted you to horror and your desire to do horror.
My lovely mum has come today. I
hope Alex mum.
There's my mum. My experience with horrors came from sneaking past buying DVDs from charity shops, and my dad letting letting me watch all of them when I was the right age of 11.
I started at 10 in Evil Dead, so that scarred me for a bit. I'll freely admit that.
I was one of those weird 11 years olds, like, yeah, rip him apart.
Well, I started with Doctor Who, you know, Philip Hinchcliffe, and then you just go...
Yeah. It always starts with Doctor Who, doesn't it, man?
Always starts with Doctor Who.
Always starts with Doctor Who. Now, when I was first exposed to horror, I kind of slowly became obsessed. Now, when I was little, I did make little short movies from home, and they were all horror, all of them. They always had to be. I remember my family always saying, "Oh, why can't you make a happy movie?" And they're like, "No, that's not allowed.
Doesn't sell.
No, people need to die in them." So
that quite marooned, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. They were gonna laugh. Tom's laughing. He's having a good time. And since then, I was exposed to Tape, the film charity, and with their encouragement, I've kind of just grown, and it's always been the genre of horror that I've used as a creative vehicle to keep on creating, really. So I started off at Tape making short films with them, and I've grown and I've started to explore film in education in short courses. And fast forward to today, I'm filming for clients. I'm a uni student now with talented Rowan Snow down there. I'm a BBFC youth paneler, so and a film shown here. So and it's all is kind of because. Now I'm not going to point at horror and be like it is because of horror, the genre like entirely, but it's such a creative device really, like for like emerging filmmakers, I think, and getting really into like the arena of filmmaking, because I think like you can make a really nice drama film about like a nice couple, but you can really come up with some bizarre ideas with horror.
One of them murders the other one.
Yeah, like you can really get weird with horror, whereas in other genres it's a bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not so easy.
Yeah, so it's not hard to see why when filmmakers come into filmmaking and just the arena of the creative arts, they always start with horror. I think was it like Edgar Wright? He said he was worried when he started like the filmmaking business because he thought he had to make an Evil Dead, because a lot of filmmakers do come in making low budget, you know, short horror films or just feature-length horror films. So yeah, I don't really know what else to say.
It's quite funny you say Edgar Wright, because we touch on people like Sam Raimi, wouldn't we?
Yes. I mean, it's such a long you know, you talk about Doctor Who. In fact, I know that I remember my first nightmare that I remember was inspired or born of an episode of Doctor Who.
Pyramids of Mars or Robots of Death?
Oh goodness me! You tell me. I'm not the aficionado really. It's a very long time ago. That's all I know.
It's Talons of Wang Chiang.
Okay. I take your word for it.
Talons of Wang Chiang. Trust me.
Okay. But yeah, I certainly went through a period, you know, just watching horror, much to the concern of my vicar mother.
It's a thing that actually warms my heart that Doctor Who is made in Wales, and Russell T Davies is back. And I know he's got a secret mantra like kids love being scared. Kids love being scared.
Of course they do. I mean, it's a roller coaster, isn't it? It's a fairground ride. You're actually safe, and you know, strap yourself in, and it's one of the 3 Fs, isn't it? You flee, fight.
I mean, we spoke to other people in the horror media, and Marion, who we've done the podcast with, and she quite wisely said it allows you to experience things in a safe environment.
Exactly.
It allows you to test your limits.
That's right, yes.
Exactly. And if you think about it, with the rise of shows like Wednesday and things like that, and the utter success, you know, I've got friends who've got grandchildren who love it and things like that, which it's just heartwarming to us. After they show them Stranger Things, which would be like, no, that's a bit extreme for those that young.
I mean, I think I have a 19-year-old who loves horror, He was watching, I think, The Descent at age 9, and I didn't. I didn't. You know, I kind of caught him watching it, and he was just, you know, glued to it, and absolutely.
I was in Cloudlow Cinema, hiding behind my popcorn and bits of that.
I mean, it's terrifying. It's possibly my favourite horror film ever. I mean, it is just a terrific.
We had Edward yesterday, and he worked on the crawlers.
Okay.
He done extra design work on the
No,
crawlers.
well, the design is amazing.
The noise of the crawlers, didn't he?
Yeah, he done the noise of the crawlers. Deep dive when I was going through IMDb.
Great
Like,
film.
holy crap.
Terrifying.
Yeah. And it's such a simple idea, though. You know?
It is
Yeah.
indeed very well told story that stays with you.
So, Bill and Arlene, you got any extra questions?
My extra question was, how do you come up with the storyline and the concept of all the films that you do?
Well, I think you kind of follow your nose, really, rather than actually come up with anything. You just remain open to ideas and possibilities, and maybe keep note and sit at the screen and stare at it for a while, and something might happen. I don't know if the process is the same for everybody, but when it's that question, where do you get your ideas from, is a very difficult question to answer, because I think it's a slightly mystical process where you just have to remain open to possibilities and stories told by other people, and just make notes and keep writing.
Stephen King called it brain farts.
Well, it'll just change. The story will change all the time. You know, I've been working on a story for a very, very long time that is a monkey on my back, really, and I need to finish it. And it's in danger of, you know, doing my head in, frankly. And some stories, they take no time to write. Others, they take longer to develop. And you just got to keep spinning those plates, I think. But they don't, in my experience, the idea doesn't come to you in a flash, fully formed, you know. It doesn't work like that, in my experience.
You got anything to add to that, Aaron? Okay. Yeah. We'll get to you.
What was the question again?
Ideas, where do they come from?
Where do they come from? No. What? Oh, I'm going to have to think about this one. No, I didn't realise this question would have been sprung on me.
Ha 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 ha, murder.
Music, really. I listen to music, and they all kind of come from there, and personal experiences, really. I write
Bring out emotions
to
in
me,
you.
yeah. So if I'm nearly set on fire by Rowan, I guess I'll write about nearly being set on fire by Rowan. Coming soon.
So Aaron the Blazing Man, running across the seafront.
It's a horror movie starring Rowan. But yeah, it is about just writing from personal experiences, because the weirdest things will happen to you, and it's, yeah, especially living in Real. So,
could you get seagulls in there as well?
Yeah, seagulls, little cuties they are.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just about writing from personal experience and creating what's really true to you, I guess. And you know, accompanying music, really. I listen to a lot of music, and I'm really into my music. So Armadillo, what I did was I wanted to research into what sound armadillos make in response to what emotions. So I locked myself in a room, put on these silent mode headphones, and I cushioned out like my bedroom doors, and I ignored my girlfriend for a long time, and I just kind of like listened to armadillo sounds at full blast, and they're really weird creatures as well. So I guess that's a part of the creative process as well. That kind of fueled my imagination to put down to pen to paper.
You were such an artist.
Very different processes, by the sounds of it.
Very weird, yeah. So proper weird creatures as well. Sounds like Ron's mum.
Aaron is available for armadillo duplication as well.
Yeah.
As a side hustle.
Yeah. I did all the sound effects of the film. The armadillos, actually. And just in music was original. The music was original, so.
You've got another question. Ellie, you got another question?
well, since your film is not really completed, I'm wondering, how did you do fire effects for, like, when it's in hell?
Well, that was, you know what, that was very last minute. We really weren't sure what to do. And we were kind of, we'd been playing with the idea of green screen because we had a green screen space available to us. But green screen is hell. It's hell. You don't need flames. And my producer, Catherine Lewis-Davis, who's a fantastic person and really knows what she's doing, discouraged me from going down that route. She said, you won't get your film made, you won't finish it. So my designer, Matt Morris, roped in North Wales Sound and Light, fantastic company, who were very generous, provided us with a great big screen, 10 metre by 4 metre high LED screen. And LED screens are being used more and more in filmmaking rather than green screen because of spill and so on for background. So we just cast a flame, really. It was just on a cycle, and then we spun the arcade machine around for the reverses, and so we only had it one side. We didn't have it surrounding us. And we had some orange lights, and then in post-production, Gellert managed to give us some foreground flames as well, and some sparks in the air, and some smoke, which really helped with creating some depth. So I was very, very lucky to have that post-production house enhance those pictures. But the base was, it was basically a television in the background.
So before we move on to some Q&A with the audience, I'm going to ask Nia if she's got any news about up-and-coming things, because she's more in the know than us, probably, in Villa Thriller. Have you seen Evil Dead Rise? I'm just going to ask.
No, I haven't.
Just checking.
No, do you know what? It's weird because it's sort of... So Abattoir happens in November, right? So this up to about March, April, it's sort of the slightly quieter really amping up, planning for it and stuff. So we tend not to be watching that much at this time of year for festival consideration, just because usually if you watch something now, it's out before November anyway, if it's a major film. So we only show sort of pre-release, or generally only show pre-release films. So ask me again in August, and I'll be like, yeah, I've seen all the stuff that's coming up. Not really. we're not that. We don't get to see the really big stuff because we're still, even though we're 18 years old this year, Abattoir is. And it's, world now. I know, we're very much leaning into the whole Abattoir turns 18 this year because obviously such a significant number for horror fans. I know, it's finally. The really fun thing about it this year that we realised last year, wildly depressed ourselves over, is that we realised there will be people who can attend Abattoir this year who were born the year that it started. But yeah. So yeah, really, actually, in terms of up-and-coming things, it's kind of where we're still on that pre-lookout for things. I mean, there's things that have just screened that... There's one of probably one of my favourite films I saw last year that we were not allowed for Abattoir because they wanted a bigger premiere, fair enough, was a film called Night Siren, which has just premiered at Glasgow, UK premiered, I should say, at Glasgow Film Festival. If you see that one, I'm not sure exactly release plans or anything, but Night Siren was one of my favourites from last year, and I wish we could have shown it, but they were like, oh, we want to wait for a bigger festival for a UK premiere, and I was like, oh, I get it, fine.
You should just roll out your Abattoir banner.
And I was like, really, look. But that's an interesting thing, though, when you sort of touch on things like elevated horror, is that is probably one where it might fall under that banner a little bit, in that it's, it's a proper film.
You can talk about it in dinner parties.
And it's that's why you don't want to premiere it at a festival like Abattoir, which I get, but it's just just why? The audience will appreciate it, it's the perfect place for it, it's not you're not losing anything by giving it, but that's how it all works. So Night Siren, when that comes out, that's one.
What country is it from?
I can't remember exactly. It's Eastern Europe somewhere. I can't remember exactly where. I think it. I don't want to guess actually, but it's an Eastern European film. And it's a female director, and it's sort of folk horror film. And
just like Mary Flynn, funnily enough.
Yeah, exactly. So it's brilliant.
So we're going to open up to the audience now. Has anybody got any questions for anyone here? Mark, as usual.
Nia, Abattoir's very famous for taking its audience out to special screenings. What's been your favourite so far?
Is it really famous for doing that? Yeah. Oh, Jesus. It's a sore point for us at Abattoir because several of the ones we've planned haven't happened because when you take people outside to watch films in November, invariably what happens is that the Welsh weather decides to throw a mini tornado at Aberystwyth, which genuinely happened the year that we intended on showing The Fog on top of Constitution Hill in Aberystwyth. So if you're not familiar with Aberystwyth, it sort of sits on Cardigan Bay. You've got Constitution Hill and there's a little cafe on top that looks out at the bay. And if you've seen The Fog, you can kind of imagine that lends itself quite nicely to a screening of The Fog. Also, freak tornado on that day meant that the words danger to human life were used, and so that we were like, maybe we shouldn't do the outdoor screening. But I'm glad that it has a reputation, because they take quite a lot of effort. We've done quite a few now. We've learned our lesson, and we now take people off-site, but into real buildings. And I would say, well, it's hard to pick one, actually, because they all kind of have their own little charm. We did, Prince of Darkness in a disused chapel, which we kind of just flooded with red light and had like old radio equipment and stuff in there. That was pretty fun. We did Friday the 13th Part 3 in a barn, with Sean S. Cunningham showing up at the end, which was pretty impressive because he arrived on that day, so he was doing a Q&A later in the week. We were like, do you want to come to the barn and see everyone wearing, we made sort of hockey masks with 3D glasses on, and it was surreal. But I think actually my favourite is when we did a double bill off-site and we took our audience into Ceredigion Museum, which is sort of an old sort of theatre essentially, so you have this sort of beautiful balcony in the main bit. So we showed Dario Argento's opera, and at the bit where if you've seen opera, where the crows attack, we pelted like cuddly toy crows at the audience from the balcony. So everyone was like, what the hell is this? And then eventually it was. But then the best part of it was we then faked an emergency, which is always risky because then people do worry. We didn't panic people too much, but we faked, Gaz and Nia have gone missing. And one of our sort of volunteers helped. We were like, right, you can't just follow us for a second. And we took everyone round the corner, down the street to the Commodore Cinema, which is a sort of brick, old-fashioned cinema that looks exactly like the cinema from Demons. And then we showed Demons as well. And we were handing out like Metropole tickets outside, and people were like, "Oh, they tricked us!" So that's probably my favourite offside screening. Sorry, that was such a long-winded answer.
It's the first time I've heard that, and I deep dive on horror sites every week, and I'm just like, wow. And the fact that it's done in Wales as well. Honestly, why? I mean, what year was that done as well?
So that was that would have been like 16, 17?
So, again, world famous and rightfully so for giving people such a horror experience.
Try our best.
And you succeed. Any other questions from the audience? Mr. Fire Guy?
So, for the Armadillo film, where can we watch it when it's released?
Letty Productions. Is that on YouTube? Yes. Awesome. Thank you for asking. No worries. Everyone like and subscribe. Love you. Thank you. You're welcome.
Enough to set you on fire.
Never mind.
Any other further ones? Oh, we've got Someone brave.
I'd like to see Geronimo again. Where can I see it?
Well, Geronimo will be shown on the BBC fairly soon, I think.
Talk about bragging rights.
Yeah, it's funded by BBC, by Film Cymru Wales for BBC Wales as part of their Beacons short films from Wales season, which I think has been going on for 3 or 4 years, and there was talk of it being shown towards the end of March. But I'm not sure if that's the case. It should be fairly soon. It's, I think, the last in a series of 6 commissions, I think. I'm right in saying? I think we were the first to complete. I'm not sure if anybody else has completed, to be honest. Because it's, you know, you've got to be able to deliver. It's quite a big deal is that in itself. But yeah, it will then be, yeah, thank you. Well, it'll be available on iPlayer at some point, but I can't give you a specific date, I'm afraid, at the moment.
So, obviously there's quite a big sort of indie horror scene, and a lot of the big studios are kind of getting back on the horror trend. Do you think there's any risk of oversaturating the market, or do you think there's room for everyone?
Well, if that's a question for me, I'm no expert on these matters. I really am not. So I'm going to hand over again to Nia, who really is an aficionado and knows what she's talking about.
Thanks, no pressure. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think anything genre-wise will have sort of peaks and troughs, particularly when it comes to sort of studio or big budget made film. And so I think in a way, yes, it almost feels sort of inevitable. But in a way, I think if you take like the 70s studio era, studio horror, that definitely was sort of a moment that kind of peaked and sort of, well, I guess...
Arguably the first elevated horror.
Exactly. And yet now it's like... Elevated horror. So yeah, I think that's kind of that. In a way, then sort of slashers came along and sort of took that place for people who are wanting horror films, but then obviously they had much. They were not appreciated in the same way, even if you had something like Halloween kicking that off with such amazing returns on it. That the sort of reputation of it, they weren't as big. But I think now it's maybe a bit different because you do have the sort of exhibition context is so different because you now just have so many streaming platforms for these things that I think, in a way, you will always get bigger budgeted horror films because so many of those big budget horror films are actually mid-budget in sort of talking big money, all of it anyway. But
we've actually seen the migration first of Smile and now Evil Dead Rise from streaming to the actual cinemas, which is a very positive reaction.
Definitely, and I think, in a way, it might be, I wonder, this is just me sort of speculating, really, it's not a solid answer, but I do wonder in what way the sort of fate of streaming platforms and the way those are sort of starting to shift a little. If you've got something like Shudder that literally not just Shudder, they're not the only one that just specialises in horror, especially because they will pick up things and they will invest in things as well. I think we will always sort of see a degree of that big budget, whatever that means, that sort of studio polished product. But whether they'll be in cinemas and in such a sort of saturation, I think that'll come and go. But the thing with horror, I think more than any other, more than most genres, is that you'll always have horror films being made because, like, Westerns peaked, they sort of re-peaked, but not in a sort of really concerted way. You don't sort of see Western.
The Western, though, it's not. And the myth that horror went away in the early 90s, it just wasn't the slashers. It slowly mutated into the meta slasher, but you still had films like People Under the Stairs, In the Mouth of Madness, which are all excellent horror films. They just, the general public weren't interested in them.
Yeah, and I think as well is that you will all, again, bringing it back to that kind of thing where, to me, not uniquely to me, but horror is interesting and it's powerful and it's appealing because of the things it can explore, and there will always be new things, new shifts in society, new whatever, to react to through a horror lens. And sometimes you don't realise that that's happening until you're looking back at it. And okay, that might be a little bit academic in that you're kind of just implanting ideas onto things that never meant them in the first place. But I do think it's kind of interesting to sort of, you will always have cycles of horror, I think, and I think horror is special in that regard. So, long-winded answer again.
Any more before we finish? Come on, take the risk. Otherwise you're going to get past chat to get out. Okay then, before we wrap things up, we've got Tom from the BFI Academy here, who's going to stand up and show you a QR code.
It's very exciting.
It is, it's very exciting for us.
Well, I made it more exciting because I put lights in there.
See, even better.
I should better recognise what.
In the tradition of horror, practical special effects is what I'll say to that. He's fighting for funding for the Wales area. He represents a big area, so if you scan the QR code and do a very short, very painless questionnaire on it,
yes,
it will help out enormously for the area, and it'll help out Wicked Wales, and it'll help out the area in general, like I said. So if you just look forward and make it uncomfortable by pointing your phones at it.
I'm going to start doing Avatar's feedback forms like that. That's genius.
And also downstairs, especially for you, Aaron, there's a masterclass with Hamed, who is an impressive professor of screenwriting, and if anybody wants to go along, it'll be the room downstairs, it'll be labelled. It starts at 1 o'clock.